we're going to begin history with reviewing the Midwest map, which will be on next Wednesday's quiz and next Friday's test. All right.
North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin,
All right, let's skip around a little bit.
Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Kansas, South Dakota, Nebraska, North Dakota, Minnesota, Missouri, Wisconsin.
Sounds good. All right, if you're not able to keep up with that, you make sure you study the Midwest region in your book. At the back of your book in the 400s, you can find a map of that. One page with the names of the states on it, and then a second page without the names, so you can quiz yourself. Or you can go on Quizlet, find the Midwest region map. It actually will tell you that it's on the next quiz and the next test. It will have what quizzes and tests it's actually on. All right, so let's begin on page 225 at the Alamo. We started learning about Davy Crockett and Sam Houston. So far, we've only been learning about Davy Crockett, right? Again, I'm not going to sing it anymore because I sort of know the tune, but some of it I don't know. He heard of Houston and Austin, so to the Texas plains he just had to go, where freedom was fighting another foe, and they needed him at the Alamo. Davy Crockett, the man who don't know fear. That's not the way we talk. We would say doesn't know fear. That's as bad grammar. All right. After serving in Congress, David Crockett was ready for his next adventure and moved to Texas. So he went from Tennessee, where he was in the government, to Texas. Once he arrived in Texas, he found trouble. The Texas Revolution had begun. Remember, at this time, Texas is not a state. Okay? Texas is not part of the United States. The Texans were fighting for independence from Mexico. So what does that mean? Who owned them? Mexico. Texas was part of Mexico at this time. They had taken over the Alamo, an old Spanish mission that they used as a fort. The Mexican president, Santa Anna, wanted it back. Turn page. Santa Anna was a harsh leader who overtaxed the Americans in Texas. The Americans decided they would rather fight than be treated unfairly, and they formed an army to fight against Mexico. The Texas soldiers were not trained in battle as Santa Anna's soldiers were, but they were ready to die in order to defend their state. None of them chose to leave, even when they were given the choice. News arrived that Santa Anna and his troops were on their way. The soldiers prepared as best they could to defend the Alamo. David Crockett was ready to fight for Texas alongside the soldiers. Santa Anna and his troops greatly outnumbered the Texans. The final attack began early on the morning of March 6, 1836. The Texans fought bravely, but they all lost their lives. David Crockett chose to die as a hero at the Alamo. Throughout his life, he took a stand for what he thought was right. So, it still doesn't tell us how many people there were. We may have to Google it, huh? But everybody at the Alamo died. All right, answer these questions. What Davy Crockett became when songs were written about him? Folk hero, letter C, very good. How Davy Crockett served in the Creek War? Scout, very good, he was a scout. The state he represented in Congress? Tennessee, very good. Because remember, at the time, Texas wasn't even really a state, it belonged to Mexico still. The name of the harsh Mexican leader?
Santa Anna.
Santa Anna, good job. And the place where David Crockett died?
Alamo.
Alamo.
Yeah,
The Alamo.
that's what I said, that was Chase.
I know, but then you corrected yourself and said what Chase said, and you shouldn't have corrected yourself, because you were right, the Alamo. Wrong state. Actually, the Alamo is not a state, it's a mission that they used as a fort. All right, now we're gonna read about Sam Houston.
I was just looking at the wrong thing.
Sam Houston. Well, they always do try to trick you sometimes, don't they? And they stuck that in there to trick you, because it started out like it looked like it was gonna be Alamo, but it wasn't. Young Sam Houston. Sam Houston was born in Virginia in 1793. When Sam was only 14, his father died and his mother moved the family to a farm in East Tennessee. There we have it. They're already comparing them. David Crockett was in Tennessee, and Sam Houston was in Tennessee. Mother, I don't want to go to school. I would rather read books at home, Sam announced. I don't want to sit in a school all day. I could learn more from the Cherokee Indians. Oh, that's the one that sold Kentucky to Colonel Henderson, isn't it? As a teenager, Sam decided to leave the farm and stay with the Cherokee Indians who lived nearby. The chief liked Sam and allowed him to stay for a long time. Sam felt that the chief was his Indian father. The Cherokees were his second family. He learned the Cherokee language and the ways of the Indians. Sam's Indian name was Kolane, which means the raven. So in Cherokee, that's how you would say the raven. Later, he even wore Native American dress in Washington, D.C. when he spoke for the rights of Native Americans. So again, there's another comparison. Did Davy Crockett, when he was serving in Washington, D.C., did he wear your typical suit? No, he wore the clothes of a pioneer, right? And now here we have Sam Houston wearing Native American dress. All right, that is a Cherokee home right there. A lot of people are mistakenly thinking that Indians, Native Americans always live in teepees, but they don't. A teepee was a temporary home when they were having to travel, like a tent if you went camping. All right, that would be a typical Cherokee home right there. Turn page. Sam Houston, soldier. There's another comparison. They both were soldiers, right? In 1812, after Sam Houston left the Cherokee, America went to war with England. So that would be the War of 1812, right? Yep. Mr. Houston joined the Army as a private. Before he left, his mother gave him a gold ring with the word honor engraved inside it. She was glad that her son was willing to fight for what he believed. Sam proudly wore that ring for the rest of his life. During the War of 1812, Sam Houston was an excellent soldier. He fought alongside Andrew Jackson, who would later become President of the United States. In one battle, Mr. Houston was badly wounded and almost died. One of the wounds left a rifle ball in his shoulder. In other words, they couldn't get it out. They had to leave it in there. That wound never completely healed, so I'm sure it gave him a lot of pain. Sam Houston left the Army and became a lawyer in Tennessee. He was elected to represent his state in Congress. During his time in Congress, Mr. Houston worked to pass laws for the rights of Native Americans. He later became governor of Tennessee. In 1832, Mr. Houston decided to move to Texas. There's another thing. They went from Tennessee. Both of them went from Tennessee to
Texas.
At that time, Texas was still part of Mexico. Some of the people who lived in Texas wanted to work peacefully with the Mexican government. Other people in Texas were willing to fight to be independent from Mexico. The Texans formed an army to fight against Mexico and chose Sam Houston to be the leader of their army. All right, so Sam Houston, he was the leader of the army fighting against Santa Anna in Mexico. But it makes you wonder, why did he not die? If he was the leader, why did he not die? Let's keep reading and find out. Battle of the Alamo. As the fighting increased, about 200 Texas soldiers met at the Alamo. There's our answer. All right, so I was pretty sure we did read it, but I couldn't remember for sure. Like I said, this is a fairly new book. Sam Houston learned what Sam Houston learned that Santa Anna was bringing thousands of troops to San Antonio to fight. So thousands of troops against 200 men?
No.
That's not a fair fight, is it?
No, not even close.
Mr. Houston sent word to warn the men at Alamo to leave, but the brave men chose to stay and fight. On February 23rd, 1836, Santa Anna and his army arrived at the Alamo and fought the Texans. The men fought bravely for 13 days until all of the Texans were killed as they defended the fort. Sam Houston was on his way to the Alamo when he received word that the men had died. Knowing he had fewer troops, he waited for the right time and place to battle Santa Anna and his men. All right, so he wasn't there at the Alamo yet when he heard that Santa Anna was coming. And he didn't make it there in time. Before he got there, the 200 men. But it took 13 days before those thousands of soldiers were able to get all of the 200 men. That took them, they fought hard, didn't they? All right. But he said that if he went then, would he have probably been killed himself. Yeah, so he's wanted to regroup, all right? We're gonna do this, but we'll do it at the right time, and that's what's gonna happen next. The Battle of San Jacinto. Remember in Spanish, J's sound like a H. So everybody say that. Please read it with me. The Battle of San Jacinto. Only 2 months after the battle at the Alamo, Sam Houston and the Texas Army came to face Santa Anna and his army at a place called San Jacinto. Mr. Houston had one of his men burn a bridge so the enemy could not turn back and escape. Santa Anna and his men were resting. They were not expecting an attack. Houston and his men yelled, "Remember the Alamo!" as they attacked. During this battle, Sam Houston's horse was shot out from under him. Even though Mr. Houston's leg was badly wounded above the ankle, he got on another horse and stayed in the battle. His determination and courage to keep fighting must have encouraged his men to do the same. The Battle of San Jacinto lasted only 18 minutes. That's not very long, is it? Remember we talked about 18 minutes is only less time than you go to a special. Your shortest special is 25 minutes. And 18 minutes wouldn't even be the whole special, would it?
Yeah.
Texas won, and Santa Anna was taken prisoner. Texas would no longer be part of Mexico. So at this time, they're not part of Mexico, but they're still not part of the United States. They became like their own nation. Turn the page. In the fall of 1836, Sam Houston was elected the first president of the Republic of Texas. When Texas became a part of the United States, he served as governor. So he was governor of Tennessee, then he was president of the Republic of Texas, and then later governor of Texas. So he was governor twice. Can you wait till after we're done reading, unless you're having a bloody nose? Wait till after we're done reading, please, Sam.
There's no tissues.
Okay, now I'll get them after we're done reading. After Sam Houston retired, he spent the rest of his life at his home in Huntsville, Texas. He died in July of 1863. He is remembered as a man who loved Texas and spent much of his life working for it to become part of the United States. The city of Houston, the first capital of Texas, was named after him. Parks, streets, buildings, and schools are also named in his honor. At Sam Houston University, the class rings of those who graduate have the word honor engraved on the inside, just like the ring Sam Houston's mother had given him. When Sam Houston was older, he wished that he had not been stubborn about going to school and learning the things that would help him as an adult. He said, "Knowledge is the food of genius, and my son, let no opportunity escape you to treasure up knowledge." All right, look at the stop and think. The word honor on Sam Houston's ring reminded him to stand for what he believed in. He stood for Texas's freedom from the country of Mexico. He fought bravely for that freedom. What are some things you should take a stand for? All right, what should we stand up for?
Country.
Our country.
For people that don't know God. It
All
seems
right.
like bullying.
All right, for people that are bullied. There's two things, and also you could say stand up for God,
Yeah.
right? You have another one?
Trump.
Okay. I like that answer. All right, let's look at the comprehension check now. As a child, what did Sam Houston enjoy doing?
Actually, I just read books.
Reading books. Remember, he wanted to stay at home from school just to read books, which that would help him to learn too. And what Native American tribe did Sam live with as a teenager, and what did he learn? So, Allison, go ahead and tell me the tribe. Cherokee, and what did he learn? Joey?
The Indian ways that
Their ways and their
Language.
Very good. Their ways and their language. What future president did Sam Houston fight alongside in the War of 1812? Do you remember his name?
Santa Anna.
No, Santa Anna is the president of Mexico. He's not a good guy.
Jackson.
Andrew Jackson, very good, Andrew Jackson. And while Mr. Houston served in Congress, for what group of people did he work to get more rights? Got my tongue twisted. Ground my eye teeth and I couldn't see what I was saying. Alright, so what group of people was he helping when he was Congress?
Native Americans.
Native Americans. That would be like the Cherokee, but not just the Cherokee, all the tribes. Remember, people had come in and taken over their land, right? Who was here first? The Native Americans. And all these people are coming from other countries and moving over here, and they're just taking over their land. So he was fighting for the rights of Native Americans, because that really wasn't right. Who did the Texas Army choose as their leader?
Sam Houston.
Sam Houston. You should all know that, because that's who we just read about. And how long did the Battle of San Jacinto last?
18 minutes.
18 minutes. And list 2 results of the Battle of San Jacinto. In other words, like who won, who lost, etc. Yeah.
It lasted 18 minutes.
All right, we already said that though. And that's not really, I want the result of the battle. Once it's over, what?
That Texas won.
Texas won. All right, so who lost? Or what were we going to say? It doesn't have to be who lost.
That it lasted.
Don't tell me it lasted 18 minutes again. I've already
No.
been told that when I asked the
I was
question.
gonna say it lasted 13 days.
No, that was the Battle of Alamo. They're asking about the Battle of San Jacinto. The Battle of the Alamo lasted 13 days, and that was thousands of Mexicans against 200 men. So that's pretty impressive. And then they turn around and in 18 minutes, they beat, in the Battle of San Jacinto, they beat them. I don't want to know how long it lasted, guys. Would you please stop telling me that? I asked that in the previous question. I want to know the results of the Battle of San Jacinto. Texas won, so then since Texas won, what happened?
Mexico lost.
Mexico lost, and so what happened? If Texas won, what was Texas trying to fight for? They won, Mexico lost, so what were they trying to fight for?
They're trying to fight off of Santa Anna's.
Yes, we know that, but I want to know, why were they going to battle against Santa Anna?
Because Santa Anna was trying to keep Texas.
All right, and so since they won, what did that mean?
That the United States could keep Texas.
Okay, no, because Texas is not part of the United States yet. You're forgetting that. Texas wasn't even part of the United States. Texas belonged to Mexico, but Texas wasn't asking to become part of the United States yet.
It became its own.
Yeah, they became their own nation. Okay, they were Texas, and they were their own nation. They went from being owned by Mexico to being their own nation. Right? They still weren't part of the United States yet. They were still where they are today as far as part of that land group. They didn't actually belong to the United States of America yet. So they got their freedom. They were their own country. They were no longer part of Mexico, and Santa Anna was actually taken prisoner. All right? In what 2 states was Sam Houston governor? He was governor of, somebody who hasn't answered. Georgia? That is not a state, that's a town.
Tennessee.
Tennessee and, you already answered, Grant. Tennessee and Texas. Tennessee and Texas. Just like Davy Crockett went from Tennessee to Texas, so did Sam Houston, Tennessee to Texas. Really quickly, I'm gonna do just a blurt version of reviewing for the quiz. It will be next Wednesday. Who wrote the first American dictionary?
No Webster.
Who was the pioneer from Texas who fought to free, the pioneer from Tennessee, who fought to free Texas?
Davy Crockett.
Davy Crockett. When I say that one, okay, please shut your book. You do not need to be looking at your book. I need you to just listen to my words. Go ahead and put your book away really quietly. Thank you. Everybody else already did. And just pay attention. Who served as governor of Tennessee and later Texas?
Sam Houston.
Sam Houston. What was the name of the Mexican president who fought against Texas?
Santa Anna.
Santa Anna. Who wrote the poem Snowbound?
John Greenleaf Whittier.
John Greenleaf Whittier. Who wrote the book Little Women?
Louisa May Alcott.
Many Texans lost their lives when they were fighting for their independence at this place,
The Alamo.
the Alamo. And Davy Crockett served in Congress as a representative of what state?
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Tennessee. And just remember, it's gotta be Tennessee because Texas wasn't a state, right? It wasn't a state, so you can't say he served in Congress for Texas. It wasn't a state yet. How many years? No. It took 20 years for Noah Webster to write what book?
American Dictionary.
American Dictionary.
The American Dictionary. Very good. And what are the 3 books found in a one-room schoolhouse?
Primer, Speller, and Bible.
Grammar, Speller, and Bible. Very good.